All right, I think we're recording. Welcome everyone to episode 9 of Quarantine Chats. And my guest today is Mr. Lonny Madeux, or some of you, if you're in his confirmation class, might know him as just Mr. M. Lonny, how's it going, my man?
Good. Thanks for having me, Regis. Good to be here.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Yeah, I thought it'd be good to have we've had, as I mentioned to you before we hopped on here, I've been trying to get a nice wide diaspora of different guests, lay people, priests, ministers, but a demographic that I have had parents on before, but I really wanted to talk about parenthood during quarantine specifically today. And I thought, who has kids? Oh, Lonny has kids. I'll ask Lonny. And here you are. So the way we've been starting these off is just, I've spoken with you a little bit about what your quarantine experience has been, but give me a lowdown of what your, past 3 months now, I guess, have been like, once you got the call that you were staying inside for a while, what's it been like?
Well, the original call was a little challenging because at the time, my wife was in Florida helping her mom recover from surgery. And so I had to have a quick conversation with my boss because the announcement about school going completely remote was 2 days before it happened here in Cheshire. So I had a quick conversation with my boss, and it was a mad scramble. And that first week was a little hectic. And then thankfully, my wife came back before they shut down the airlines.
Oh my gosh.
And but now it's been an interesting challenge. We're all doing our regular jobs plus teacher plus daycare plus playmate because they can play with each other but they can't see their friends or their cousins or anyone. So it's been a big change. Definitely,
yeah. That's change is the name of the game for all of us right now. So it sounds like you've been embracing it though, which is definitely the more you try to fight the change, the more difficult it's going to be, especially right now.
That's true.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit specifically about, let's get right into it, about parenting in quarantine. So just for those who don't know, give us a little brief overview of who your children are, how many of them there are, and just a brief little intro on that.
Sure. So I have 2 children. I have a boy, age 9, it's Charlie, and a daughter, age 5, and she's Lauren. Yep. Okay. And so Charlie is in 3rd grade. Lauren would start kindergarten this coming year in the fall, assuming everything goes normally.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say assuming.
So it's been sort of like a foot in 2 world. We have a foot in the daycare world for her, the preschool daycare world for her, and the elementary school world for Charlie. And it's been a balancing act because, and to a certain degree, it helps that my wife works 2nd shift. So she's got time, during the main part of the day when she can do stuff, and then I can take, first thing in the morning and then after 2 in the afternoon when she leaves for work.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. That first shift, 2nd shift, night shift. We don't think about that as much where we're in this different situation, but I suppose that's kind of a hidden advantage for you guys that you can, it's kind of like a handoff of the kids kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In talking to other parents who both have regular 9 to 5 day jobs, it's more of a shuffle. It's, if one parent can be on a conference call and the other one can be managing the kids, that's fine. But when they're both having to do projects or meetings, then what do you do? No one's watching the kids except maybe the TV or the homework.
Right. Yeah, the TV or the homework. We know which one they choose. As a former kid, I can tell you. Yeah, you mentioned taking on a lot of different roles, teacher, parent, playmate, cook, chef, all these different roles. And, in many ways, parents have a lot of those roles to some degree, just by virtue of being a parent. You teach your kids things, you cook things for your kids, you play with your kids, there's all those things there, but they're all kind of magnified now.
Right.
It's like when you put the magnifying glass over the ant or something like that and the sun gets really hot and it's like, oh crap, what do I do? So it interests me that you seem to have this just kind of like, all right, this is what it is. you know, we're taking these different roles. Sometimes it's going to be rough, but this is where we're at. So has that been the case from the beginning, or was there kind of a transition period, maybe during that first week when your wife was away, of like, oh crap, what do we do here? How did you get to this point?
Well, I will say that that the first week, I think, was probably my children's favorite because it was dad parenting. You know, you do the best you can. You're on your own, but some things are going to slide. If the room doesn't get cleaned, oh well. You know, nobody died. The homework got done.
Oh, man after my own heart.
But so that there was for us, the biggest transition was in terms of the homework, the schoolwork. Excuse me. We didn't have Charlie's in third grade, and at the original outset, it was fourth grade and above has all their schoolwork online. Third grade and below will have papers that come home for the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it was, with assignments on there. And so for the first 2 weeks, we were doing that, and then the announcement came out, everybody's doing on computer stuff. The third graders are all going to switch over. So we had to call and get a Chromebook.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because I use my computer for work. My wife uses her computer for stuff and for, library activities for my daughters and things like that. So it was a little bit of a scramble there as he transitioned to the computer work.
Definitely.
And there were some challenges because I've never used Google Classroom before. My wife has never used it before, so it was learning curve.
Absolutely. And especially, I mean, that's another thing that sometimes gets kind of swept under the rug and doesn't get talked about enough, but like families don't necessarily have spare computers just lying around. I mean, certainly some do, and there's nothing wrong, I mean, with having a spare computer, and God bless, more power to you if you have one. But that's another thing that a lot of families have had to kind of figure out, like, okay, we're moving to online learning. How do we get our kid online? So there's a lot of kind of these subtle hidden challenges that you don't really see from the outside, which I suppose is in many ways parenting as a whole. Speaking as a non-parent, but that's my impression, at least. So one of the things that I've taken away from this quarantine, and I've kind of felt in myself, is I've come to appreciate my family a lot more. I'm very much of the age where it's kind of like, all right, family, you go over here. I'm going to go off and do my own thing right now. And that's kind of like the natural urge, of people my age, as you start to become more independent and, you go and get jobs and that sort of thing. But I found myself really appreciating time with my family a lot more than I did prior to quarantine. And I think that's something that I'll be taking away from quarantine as well. So what do you hope that your kids take away from this, kind of internalize? We'll talk about some of the external stuff later, but what do you hope they take away, and what do you hope they've learned during this time?
That's a great question. So I hope they don't end up hating us, I guess is like number one.
There you go.
Familiarity can breed contempt, and what we've discovered is that, with the situation, you're around each other all the time. And with little kids, you can't say, go to your room for 5 hours and do your homework. You've got to keep them somewhere where you can see them.
Right.
In terms of what I hope they take away, I hope they take away some of the memories of the activities that I think and my wife think are important during this period. For example, my wife and I have been trying to do more cooking with the kids, including them in the process. I hope that's something they remember 20, 30,
Absolutely.
40 years. You had mentioned that you and your family have been playing a lot of board games.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
So, yeah. And so we've been doing some activities, fun play activities. And we hope that children remember those and not so much the yelling about the mess in the house. I will say one of the really amazing things that I think is going to be a good takeaway for my kids is a bond that they're forming, since they're forced to be each other's really only same age playmates. they have been doing a lot of activities together, and my daughter wants to be like her big brother.
Of course.
And he taught her how to ride a two-wheel bike.
Wow.
And he taught her how to climb the climbing tree. And that was 100% independent of either my wife, Michelle, or my doing. That was something she said, hey, can you teach me to do this? And they went for it. And so I really hope that is something that, sort of a glue that keeps them together, and keeps them in connection for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. That's really special, I think, because that's something that you don't hear as many of those stories as you would like of, hey, my kids were just playing out in the backyard and my son taught my daughter how to ride a bike. Like that's not, especially in the world that we live in now where everyone is so busy, and even just siblings having time to like take an hour and just go outside and play together is not, I think, something that happens as much as we would like it to. So first of all, it's great to hear that your kids have been, spending more time together, teaching each other stuff. I think that's awesome. But also that, there is good stuff for them to take away from this too. A lot of people talk about what the psychological impact of something like this is going to be on our young children. And certainly that should be discussed. This is kind of the defining moment of a generation in many ways. But there's also a lot of good internally that they can take away from it. So I do hope that your children take that, and that all children can find something to, have found something during quarantine to edify themselves.
And I will say that we have a number of families with little kids on the street, and there have been a lot of family walks that have gone by and kids riding bikes together, and that's really, really edifying to see. It was really wonderful to see that there's that out there as well.
Definitely. I've seen more families, people in general, but families walking together through our neighborhood over the past 3 months than I've seen in the past 3 years, if not more than that. I mean, seriously, it's like, and when people drive by, you give a wave or something like that. There's just kind of this spirit of everybody wants to get outside a little bit because they're stuck of being inside. So that's really good to see, I think.
Yep.
So, all right, enough about your kids. No, I'm just kidding. Let's talk about you and your wife specifically. But, well, still kind of about your kids. I want to hear how your children have influenced your quarantine behavior, because here's the thing. All of us are dealing with this on an individual level. So, I have my ways of coping with quarantine and what I need to do, self-care, that kind of thing. My sisters have their ways. My parents have their ways. You don't get that luxury of just thinking about, all right, what's the best way for Lonny to handle this and the best way for Lonny to deal with this? How has the presence of your children and thinking about how you might influence them, how has that impacted your quarantine behavior?
This actually kind of dovetails with a question that you had asked Victoria, and I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce Victoria's last name. So Victoria, if you're watching this, I'm not going to you had asked her about how she finds holiness. And she talked about, wanting to take that time to reflect, personal reflection, and that when you have kids, when they're around all the time, you don't have alone time. They need supervision. They want attention. Even if you're in the bathroom, they want that attention. It's banging on the door. What are you doing in there? But
what do you think?
So they're with you constantly. And one of the struggles that one of the difficulties I've always had with kids is that kids are like this horrible mirror that you can see your faults and hypocrisy reflected in. And having the kids around, it's like having that mirror around constantly. And so in that regard, it's been, we've had to be hyper conscious of our behavior. For example, during normal times, I might sneak an ice cream on the way home from work because there's an ice cream store on my way home. But you always tell your kids, no dessert before dinner. And so that kind of thing, can't do that anymore. And you have to be always careful of what you say, and always careful of what you do.
Right.
And so having them around, although let me be clear, I love my family and I love my children.
Sure.
But it also means having to constantly, in a way that we're not normally used to, be very, very conscious of our behavior, because that children will pick up on that, and that behavior will be reflected back at us, and that's not something any parent wants to see, their worst flaws coming out of their children.
So yeah, absolutely not. I mean, I think that's it's a double-edged sword. Certainly, you see the best and worst parts, of your genome, literally.
Right.
That's it's so fascinating to me, because obviously I don't have this perspective. I don't have kids, but it's such an interesting phenomenon that I'm sure I will never be able to understand until or unless I have kids of my own. But I think that's a unique binding agent during quarantine that you can only experience when quarantined with your children or your parents, because blood DNA relatives are the only people who have that level of you in them. So it's interesting that you say that, because so there's 4 of you in your family, so you are mirrored in both of your kids. They are mirrored by both you and your wife. Your wife is mirrored in both of your kids. So it's kind of like a hall of mirrors is what it creates.
That's good analogy. I like that.
So you see, these distorted images of yourself now. But I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So what are give me like 2 or 3 things. What are things that you would like to be doing during quarantine that you have sacrificed for your kids? I mean, like, I know one of the things that really helps me calm down and clear my head is I'll either watch a movie or play some video games or something like that. So if you're the same way, my guess is you don't have an hour and a half to just throw on the Xbox in the evening or so. So what have you kind of given up during quarantine that you would have liked to have done?
So the interesting thing is, a lot of the things, the sacrifices that we normally make for our children, they haven't really changed in a lot of regards. It's just they've become more exacerbated, more exaggerated. So, for example, I might, if I'm at work, I might read a book or something on my lunch break.
Sure.
I can't do that now. Or you'd come home and you couldn't watch a movie till you put the kids to bed anyway, but now you've got maybe an hour or 2 free time during the day that you might watch a movie, but you can't because the kids are there, because it's a constant frustration to my kids, because I have to tell them, no, this movie that dad was watching, you can't watch either, whatever reason. And then have to explain that to them. So it's a lot of the same, similar sacrifices that you make as a parent, but they're just bigger now and more common. So your downtime stuff, like wanting to go and, I don't know, play a board game, or read a book, or a video game, or watch a movie, or have a conversation with your spouse, right? All of those things are now interrupted or have to be postponed because there's little ears around them. Those kind of things.
Definitely. It's interesting that you say that they're the same sacrifices that you were making before quarantine, but they are exacerbated and, kind of, they're grown and intensified during this. Obviously, one of the initial reasons for starting these quarantine chats was for our young people. So the hope is that our young people are seeing this and hearing that, hey, your parents were making these sacrifices for you even before quarantine started. So
with little kids, I think the sacrifices are a bit different than with perhaps older kids, teenagers,
absolutely,
or young adults, right? So I know that there's a couple teenagers who live across the street, and they play a lot of really fun board games, and they have movie nights and things like that. And so the sacrifices that I think you would have to make for teenage kids is very different than the ones you make for little kids. I'm not saying one is easier or better than the other. They're just going to be different.
Absolutely. I mean, totally. I mean, the difference between, you know, a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old or a 16-year-old is, I mean, how many years of development is that? So certainly there's, you know, we have across the entirety of our parish, we have this wide range of, you know, different clumps of people who are stuck in houses together, you know, across varying different ages, stages of development, levels of maturity, grades, jobs. There's probably 1,000 different melting pots out there, more than 1,000, but you get my drift. So I want to talk a little bit about, obviously May 20th was yesterday, 2 days ago? I think it was 2 days ago. And so Connecticut,
they run together a little bit these days.
Oh gosh, time means nothing. We've been in quarantine both for 10 years and like a half a day, you know.
That's accurate. That is accurate.
So with the 20th and the kind of soft opening of Connecticut, you know, state parks opening back up, outdoor seating at restaurants, that sort of thing, we have slowly started this process of beginning to open things back up. As a parent, where are you at with regards to thinking about your children and thinking about what their life is going to be like as things start to open back up? Are you excited for them to maybe get to see some friends again in some capacity? Are you terrified at the thought of them leaving the house? What is your parental perspective on things opening up slowly?
My perspective is going to be, I think, a slightly askew from what a lot of folks will have. My wife works as a nursing supervisor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So she's, for the past year and a half, 10 years, 5 weeks, 2 days, whatever this quarantine's been going on for, she's been getting potential exposure many days every week. Mm-hmm. And so we have had to be a little more cautious. Because potentially my children and I have been exposed. Michelle has a process that she goes through when she comes home to try and limit that and mitigate it. So opening is going to be a little bit delayed for us. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, the kids are very starved for contact with their friends, their cousins, their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, somebody other than their parents, right? Last night, I went to call my son in for dinner, and I couldn't find him. And he had biked down the street and was standing at the end of the neighbor's driveway, shouting back and forth with their kids. And so, you know, there's Zoom calls, there's neighborhood yelling, but that playing, I think, is something that they're really, really starved and really hungry for. So I'm not concerned about them getting out there. I mean, I don't want, if they're potentially carriers, I don't want them out there, you know, interacting with other people's families, but I'm very excited for them to be able to get the things that they need to help their own social and emotional development and stability.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that sounds like a good way of looking at it, you know, kind of a certainly cautious, but, you know, remembering that these are also kids who are so sick of being stuck inside with their parents, you know, that's just kind of, that's the way that it is. And certainly, once again, I, as a non-parent, would never critique anyone's parenting style. You know, I'm in no position to do that. So everybody has their own way of thinking about this, especially with regards to their children. So, you know, would never want to say any one way is right or wrong, but that sounds like a very reasoned and healthy approach to me. So I'm glad to hear you say that. And also, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you know, every kid is going to be different. Every family is going to be different. So one model certainly won't work for everybody.
That's right. Yeah. Of course not. Just like with anything.
Right.
I did want to say, the idea of your son biking down the street and shouting back and forth with the neighbors, that's kind of cool. And it's interesting to see, you know, I've heard a couple of other stories like that of I'm sure you've heard of the TV show Kids Say the Darndest Things, right?
Yep.
So it's like kids have this, like, they don't think in the same way that adults do. They don't have enough life experience to fall into the thought patterns that we're supposed to. So, sometimes they think of like creative and different ways to interact with their friends, or to, kind of to stay mentally awake and, kind of adapt during this quarantine, that I think we can learn something from that. Kind of that flexibility that they have, because they don't have the experience to fall into, these normal paths. They could say, all right, I'll go over here and I'll do this. And, oh, we got to change. Okay, I'll go over this way. It's like, I think that's something that we can take a lesson from.
Yeah, and they are very resilient. They are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is a slight pivot here into a different form of children. So obviously you have your parents, or excuse me, your children, your biological children. You do. Yes, you have both. Right. Come on, Regis, get it right. But I want to talk about your pseudo children, your kind of adopted children. So obviously you are a confirmation teacher.
That's correct.
Through the parish as well. And that has been one of the, religious education classes, the sacraments, a lot of those things have been kind of derailed, and, things have been confusing and here, there, and everywhere. So what is your hope for your confirmation students with regards to, the sacraments and their faith, and what effect this time will have on their faith? What is your hope for that? And what would you say to your students if they were in front of you right now?
That's a really good question, Regis. So my hope, well, first let me say that this is very difficult, because this has shifted something, put a new burden on a lot of the parents, not just the confirmation kids, but all the religious education parents, to be the sole, not just primary, but sole teacher of the faith to their children. And it's with school and everything else, it's a big lift. For my confirmation kids, because they are, 15, 16 years old, I would strongly encourage them and their parents to take this opportunity to really talk about their faith. Because we normally have so much going on in our lives, especially teenagers, sports, music, theater, whatever, homework, applying to college, that there's so much to distract from really, really important conversations. And we, as parents, particularly of teenagers, a lot of times there's a temptation to not talk about the heavy stuff, because you want to talk about the day-to-day logistical stuff or pleasant stuff. And sometimes it can be harder to discuss your spiritual life with your kids.
Of course.
And I would really, really encourage parents to take this opportunity, not necessarily to open up the book and say, okay, we're going to learn about the commandments or the gifts of the Holy Spirit, but just to have a conversation with the kids about what their faith faith life has been like. And if the parents won't do it, then I would say to my students, that onus then falls upon you. You are about to become adults in the Catholic Church. Your faith life is going to become your responsibility. This is a phenomenal opportunity for you to take some of that responsibility on yourself and ask just basic questions about your faith, about your parents' faith to them. Maybe even to your siblings, or in a Zoom call with your friends. I know with friends it's going to be a little more difficult.
Sure.
But since you're having lunch and dinner and all that quality time with your parents, go for a walk with them. Ask that question. Mom, Dad, what do you believe? What do you think about this thing in the church? Or we learned about this? Or how did this thing we learned about in CCD impact your life? Because your parents went through the same program, a very similar program. They learned the same things. Have those conversations. That would be my suggestion.
I couldn't have said that better myself. I mean, conversation is a gift from God, because so much good can come from conversation that can never come from a formal setting. Because conversation is just taking the human brain and putting it into words. And remarkable things can come from that. And I think you hit the nail directly on the head when you say, you know, being confirmed and becoming an adult in the church specifically it is wonderful, and it is a gift, and it is grace, but it's also, it's a responsibility. It's not it's not as if you graduate from high school and you're handed your diploma and you wear your cap and gown and that completes your obligation to your high school. This is, okay, you have finished your training program and now we take the training wheels off. And now your older brother's going to teach you how to ride a two-wheel bike, that kind of thing. That's so I would echo that. And I would urge our teenagers specifically to really take responsibility for your faith during this time. I mean, if you're kind of in the first episode of Quarantine Chats, which was almost 2.5 months ago now, where I sat down with Father Federico, we talked about how this is, if you're on the fence about whether or not this Catholic faith is yours, you again, knock on wood, God, hopefully you will never have a better chance to mine that and to really find out if this is for you than right now. So I couldn't have said that better myself. Thank you for that. One last kind of fun thing that I want to do before I let you go here, Lonny, is so pretend I'm not here right now. Pretend you're sitting in a room and this is like a quarantine parent support group. And you guys are sharing your tips for how to survive during quarantine, with children around all the time. What would be a couple of quick tips that you would have for other parents just to stay sane right now?
So I would offer two. The first is to remember that during this time, your most important human relationship is probably with your spouse. They are going through exactly what you're going through. They know all the events of the day. And take that time to talk to your spouse, because it will help to keep you sane. That you can, whether it's planning and coordinating the next day, trying to deal with a crisis that had happened today, or just sit down with your husband or wife and saying, I know we had the same day together, but how was your day? Right? So some kind of normalizing, stabilizing activity with your spouse. The second tip that I would give is to find some way to make a positive memory or two, something really impactful that your kids will remember after this. The kids aren't going to remember the individual school lessons that they're doing on the computer 20 years from now, right?
Sure.
They're not going to remember, the brushing their teeth and going to bed. The routine stuff they're not going to remember. Do something that is unusual and special and is an activity that you guys can do together, so that when they're telling their kids the stories about quarantine, they can say, I remember my parents and I, we made masks for people, or we did grocery shopping or grocery deliveries for the widow who lives next door. Some kind of positive family activity that they'll remember 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Definitely. I think that those memory things specifically is, we've done a lot of stuff like that. We've had, my sisters have cooked themed dinners. We've done, it's been pretty cool. I give them a lot of credit. They are so much better in the kitchen than I am. And they my sister, so I'm the oldest, the middle sister just graduated undergrad and she's studying to become a teacher. So she got a laminator. So they've been laminating menus for each themed dinner. I mean, they go hard. But those memories are what has, I mentioned earlier that I've gotten a greater appreciation for time spent with family. And I think I'm going to take that out of quarantine. That's what has given me that, is those positive family memorable activities. So it's working for me. And I'm just a big kid. So, you might as well try with your little kids. All right. Well, Lonny, thank you so much for coming on this morning. I really appreciate it. At the last minute, you swung on, and it's it's a big help to me. This is,
me. I've had fun.
yeah, absolutely. This has been fun. So this is last chance on the soapbox, such as I can provide here. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Final thoughts, boy. Probably 1,000 of them, but if I had to pick just one, it would be to really take this time and see it as an opportunity to grow closer to the people that you're trapped in the house with. I know everyone wants to go out and learn a new language or pick up some new hobby, but this is also a really great opportunity to grow closer to the people who are closest to you physically and emotionally. And I would say take the opportunity to do that. Really, kids, ask your parents for a story. Parents, tell your kids something about an experience in their life. That would be my suggestion.
Sounds like a good plan to me. All right. Well, Lonny, again, thank you so much for being here. And hopefully I will be seeing you in some capacity pretty soon.
I suspect so. All right. Thanks, Regis.
All right. Thank you, Lonny.